Okay, everybody, this is my spoiler review of The Handmaid's Tale Season 5, Episode 5, Fairytale. What's interesting about this episode is that it's actually only 43 minutes long. It's a lot tighter, but I actually think the short time worked in the show's favor here. I'm going to get into why. But I'm going to separate this review into two parts because really this episode is only split into two storylines, which is June's side and Serena's side. So let's start with everything with June. So they're really establishing more and more now with June and Luke. We're really leaning into the goal of getting Hannah back. And it does that by opening with this famous shot from earlier season with June and Hannah at the aquarium looking at the jellyfish. Just a beautiful shot. Reminds you of the glory days of the show as well. So they want to get more information about the wives' school. They get a call that there is a guardian that has information, but he got stuck, now we learn, in no man's land. So Luke takes this heroic step and says, I'm going across. And June's like, I'm going with you. June loves to see Luke stepping up. And this is a big character change for Luke. This is like the most heroic thing he's done so far. And what I like about this episode is it's actually made me enjoy the character of Luke. It really is something that made his character much, much better. This is the episode I've been waiting forever for, something like this with Luke's story and make him just more interesting, likable, and someone we can root for and get a little more attached to, and I really felt that here. And knowing how this episode ends, that they're going to get separated, we know now they're not going to come back for a while, and that Rita is stuck babysitting Nicole. That's the show I really want to see, is Rita babysitting Nicole. That would be very interesting how that goes on. And poor Rita really doesn't have much screen time this season. Usually every season there's a character or two who kind of gets put to the side, and it seems like Rita's suffering that for sure. But we see now when June goes out in the woods with Luke, she's having flashbacks of when she got captured all the way at the beginning of this show in the woods. And they run into a guardian that's literally hanging in a tree with the rapist sign on him. A little moment of horror here. It also throws in a scene with Lily and Moira where they're bonding, having a drink, talking about Moira being from Detroit and how much she hates that city. But it's not that interesting of a scene, so maybe it's just there to set up possibly some romance between Moira and Lily. It's hard to tell at this moment, but I'm guessing that's why we got a minute with them together, because I don't know what else that scene was actually doing. So they run into this guardian, Jaden, who they were looking for. They know it's him because we figure out the code is Raspberry Beret, which is a reference to a great Prince song. So the show is giving a little love to Prince, which is always awesome. And speaking of music, not only is it giving love to Prince, I want to give love to Adam Taylor here, who's the unsung hero of the show. His music has been consistently awesome each season. And again, it stood out for me in a lot of these sequences in the woods with June during this episode. There was some new music being put in the score here that I really enjoyed and really ramped up scenes that might come off a little slow and boring, made them way more suspenseful. So props to him for being so consistent throughout the seasons. So Jaden brings him to his little hangout spot, which is a bowling alley. And Jaden gives him more intel about the plums, which are what Hannah is in, this wives training school, and that they're basically the princesses of the area. They're completely taken care of, and they're getting set up to be wives. And that's when Luke's like, but she's only 12, and that's the real messed up thing of it all. And he also mentions, though, that they aren't there very long. They're matched up quickly, so that's good to throw in the writing because it adds a ticking time bomb effect to get more suspense here that, okay, they gotta hurry up to get Hannah, which always kind of works. He also hands him a USB with some info on it about this system, so that will probably come back at some point, which would be important. But Jaden suggests for them it's not safe to go out in the day, so this is kind of ironic because if they did go out in the day, he probably wouldn't have stepped in a mine and would have saw it. So probably a poor call on Jaden's part. But they get to bowl, and Luke, we see, loves bowling, but Jaden says he did as well. And he says that everything from before Gilead is like a dream. It's foggy, and he doesn't remember much. So this is really soul-crushing for June and Luke to hear, because that makes them think of Hannah, someone else who grew up in Gilead like Jaden, and that it's their fears realized even more that Hannah really doesn't remember much possibly about anything about them. But the hope put in this situation is they recognize how pure Jaden is, and that there's hope for people that even grew up in Gilead, that they can realize how messed up it is like Jaden does. So that's the silver lining here. Now we see there's bowling, there's beer, and Luke performs Let's Stay Together for June, and they get this romantic moment. This is the Fairytale moment here of the episode. Why it's definitely titled Fairytale. It's this little moment of happiness and peace between the two of them. I thought seeing this, that Luke was definitely a goner this episode. That usually what happens with TV shows when they get this great episode for the character and they have this romantic moment. They're not going to stay together. But he survives, but it was more to set up the tragedy of them not staying together in the end and getting separated. So this was actually my favorite cliffhanger of the season yet. And it made me excited to see now what's going to happen with Luke and June. But not only June, it's more interesting that Luke now is someone who's caught and is headed probably to Gilead, I would assume. So that's fascinating and unique to me and interesting to see how he might react to that environment. And I really did like everything happening with Jaden here. It's a props to the actor being a guest actor on a show and coming up big time. I thought he was great and he worked well with Luke and June. So everything going on in that, I did actually really enjoy. And like I've always said about the show, the more we get away from Canada, the better. I feel like the show suffers in Canada, gets boring and dull. But anytime we're kind of learning more about the society of Gilead and what goes on, I feel like that's where Handmaid's Tale is strongest, because that's what we were put into when the show started. This is the lore of the show. So I'm more interested in that than kind of just watching a political show in Canada. So let's shift everything with Serena. So Serena is really developed in this episode as an animal trapped in a cage now. She was given a home to live, but it's really bittersweet for her, and it's just getting worse and worse for her in this home as the episode goes on. But they set up right from the beginning that when she's asking for Mr. Wheeler, she's given answers like he's busy, he's got a lot to do. So she's already realizing that Mr. Wheeler is not seeing Serena as a top priority at all. She's not really important to him. If she was, he would have been there the first day she was there. And it's more of that his wife, Mrs. Wheeler, is just obsessed over Serena. And I don't know if we will go there, but I'm starting to get a little bit of Ramsay Bolton vibes with Theon in Game of Thrones. We'll see how obsessive Mrs. Wheeler actually is of Serena. It might not go that far of obsession, but we'll see. But you see this scene with Serena where there's all these infertile woman around her, and she's a symbol of hope, Serena, that she has this baby. And this is just a callback to earlier seasons when Serena was with her original wives clique and that they were touching her stomach and the baby. So it makes you think this is a possible new clique for Serena forming here. But that's what I really liked about this episode, that it was tight, it was having a lot of good callbacks to earlier seasons, and a lot of these scenes actually really landed for me. And where it really stood out to me this episode was the flashbacks. I really enjoyed these flashbacks. So we first see the first flashback is Serena with Mrs. Putnam, and you see they're looking at captured children in rooms that look like rooms from Stranger Things. I was waiting for 11 to pop up here. And we see Miss Putnam's attitude. She's like, oh, do I really want one of these kids in my house? And then she's like, oh, do I have to have a desperation to even have a handmaid? I like to see this angle of the wives. We don't really get to see enough, and get, again, more into what's going on behind the scenes in Gilead. And you see Serena's like, they need a home, though, and she's more pushing through that feeling of she doesn't want that stuff like Miss Putnam, too, but she's trying to go with what the vision of Gilead is, and she waves to one of the kids, and that kid's like, yeah, no. And you see, though, that Serena's, like, not fully on, like, I'm going to get a handmaid yet, because she's like, me and Fred are going to keep trying. So, again, it's angling more and going back this episode to the root of how Gilead was started about this infertility crisis. So this is what I've been asking for, is getting into the bones of how this all started, what mindsets were like. So this to me is very fascinating. And I want to go to the other flashback scene where Serena's with Lydia choosing her handmaid. And you notice the first one she picks, Lydia's like, yes, she also caught the eye of Commander Waterford. And then Serena puts that one back like, no. I gotta laugh out of that. But the one she picks, not to be confused, it's not June. This is the handmaid that was before June and ends up committing suicide in the house. So again, this was just fascinating to me, and to know that it's leaning into Serena was trying with Fred and wasn't fully running to have a handmaid at first. So in the present timeline, though, Serena just gets more and more red flags, a situation she wouldn't want to be in, where women are really, really suppressed. Like when she's offering Mrs. Wheeler to be on the call with her, Mrs. Wheeler's like, oh no, I don't do that. Wives don't do that. And then not only that, when she goes on the call, Warren's there and gives Serena full-on hand slap here. But Serena actually comes up with a brilliant idea for Gilead's side to not make this a Gilead information center, make it a fertility center. That's what's going to appeal to people and feed on people's needs and wants to kind of rope them in. It's a genius decision that Mr. Wheeler later on will tell Serena that, but she's like, hey, that was my initiative. And he's like, yeah. Don't worry, you'll get input. But they're clearly just taking her idea. They don't need her to actually act it out. And they're putting her, just like, you worry about your baby and be on bed rest. This is obviously what I'm talking about here with the caged animal and Serena. And that caged animal effect literally runs to literally the fence outside, where she's got all these followers and fans bringing her flowers, and she's not even allowed to bring them in and talk to them, what she wants to do. So her own bodyguard telling her commands from Commander Wheeler sets her off a bit, and she's realizing, like, I have all these supporters. There is a part of Serena that's like, I don't need to listen to these commanders. But you don't feel bad for her, because she's the one who, again, created this place, set this up, and should have just followed June's lead to stand up for woman and do the right thing. So she's kind of, this is her own doing. But again, we see that Serena, they're forming steps here that Serena is clearly going to rebel against Mr. Wheeler, and there's going to be a rift inside a rift where you have June versus Gilead, but then you have kind of Serena in Gilead versus Gilead itself, in a sense, and how much power women have there. And also, we see with Warren and Lawrence that Lawrence has this idea of New Bethlehem, and this is Lawrence's play here we've been talking about, and that this is how he's going to get people back into the country, slowly start to make things more normal. But Warren's onto this, and he's like, no, this is not what we want. We don't want people poking around. He wants the borders up. He wants walls. Warren right now, currently, by far, is the most evil character on this show. So like I was saying, Mr. Wheeler comes up to Serena now, and it's a disappointing meeting for Serena, and he doesn't even let her have a cell phone. So this probably will really make Serena act quickly and against this. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Serena and Mrs. Wheeler, but interesting to see what happens with June and Luke here. This was actually a really good episode for me. It's actually my favorite of the season. I actually like the shorter run time. I think it actually benefited where I didn't feel any slog here. And maybe moments in the bowling alley can come off to some people as slowing down, but I think it was really important. I think it was something that we need to see with Luke and June, and give Luke's character more interesting things to do and likability, which I've been waiting for, and that it's setting up interesting stuff. Just being back in Gilead and not so much time in Canada was a relief. Again, it's pretty simple. You do that, I feel like the show's just way more interesting. So that's my take on it. I think I finally was more engaged in this episode. The first one I'm actually really engaged in the whole season. So I'm going to give this one an 8.8, and it's giving me a little hope now that we're halfway through the season, so maybe the second half will pick up and be more interesting, because to me, this was steps in the right direction. And like I said, just give me more stuff explaining the fertility crisis. It excites me that they're actually delving into that more. I want to know about that stuff. That stuff started from season 1. Let's get more into the interesting stuff, not just people protesting in Canada and rinse, wash, repeat with June and Serena just arguing. I'm more interested in kind of seeing the politics of that Gilead system. But let me know what you thought of this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I read every comment. I try to respond as many as I can. Please make sure to check out my reviews. Also of House of the Dragon, I'm doing that as well. I've done a bunch of interviews as well. You can check that out with different celebrities, covering a lot of horror movies in particular, so that might interest you. Please follow me at Steve Varley Show on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for more of me. And if you want to leave a tip, you can hit the thanks button below. That'll help me in so many ways. I'm really grateful for all you guys. I try to read every comment. I really do. And thank you so much. Praise be. And I'll see you next time.